Welcome back to Yield Today with Dallin Candland. I'm joined by Richard Oelberger. He is the host of the Richard Listens podcast. He also does a lot of psychology and different things, helping out people. And just really glad to have him on the show today. So thanks for joining us, Richard.
Thank you, Dallin. Glad to be here. Love the title and topic of the show.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we're trying to figure out a little bit better what that means, and so I appreciate your quick, just go for it. Keep going. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, so much of it is right what we interpret it to be. So I know there's all this pressure, like to brand your show and have it be really clear what you talk about. But so much of these things are subjective, right? When we're talking about quality of life, subjective experience, and human performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the metaphors of yield, right? What are we trying to put out in the world? What are we trying to create?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. Just a super fast story, I guess. I got to dig up some potatoes last year, and it was hot summer sun in Driggs, Idaho, and that's where some of the ideas for Yield Today just kind of really hit me. It was like there's all these potatoes, but you could always dig deeper and find more potatoes. But at the same time, we were moving as fast as we could to get as many potatoes as possible. And there's a point where we had to leave the potatoes behind. We knew there were potatoes we were leaving behind, but we couldn't do anything about it. The same thing goes with our lives. We have limited time and we need to make the most of it. At the same time, be in a good position to, make the most of it and work hard at it. Have a good time. So
It's a great metaphor. I love when I meet people that work with the land. I mean, it seems to come like readily accessible to them. The appreciation of output and the process of growing things. A great book I read a few years ago. I'm looking for the author right now, but it's called The Pumpkin Plan, which is a similar idea, right? Like that if you knew nothing about pumpkins and you wanted to become a world-class pumpkin grower, what would you do? What would your process be? And so it's interesting to have these questions of ourselves, like would I go and to Target and buy the cheapest seeds? Like what's your personality tendency? Would you be willing to spend the money and go to the fair and spend $1,000 on a world-class pumpkin seed that may only yield you 2 or 3, but all you need is 1 world-class pumpkin? So, right, these important decisions we make about what we want to create, and planning and thinking ahead, and yet in the moment having to evaluate, right, is it a scarcity mindset? I've got to get every potato possible or there won't be enough for the winter, right? And what we lose sight of sometimes when we're in that mentality, and sometimes the difficult decisions we have to make in leadership and leading ourselves forward.
yeah, we could definitely go on and on about this. I'm already enjoying this conversation, but I think we need to go back to the listeners. I know there's a lot of people that are just kind of struggling with themselves. They weren't ready for this pandemic. I don't think anybody was. And it's just kind of toppled the world over a little bit. So what are your, quick advice for somebody's self-care tips and things just to kind of help people get a better feel for where their life is going and have greater hope moving forward?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I'm glad you're addressing it on this show. I mean, the unique aspect of this pandemic is the sudden change, the suddenness. And when you deal with trauma psychology or when anything happens to you that's adverse in any way, it's how we interpret it. And when we can't control or predict things in our lives, that can cause a lot of adverse reactions. So the way I like to look at it is that this pandemic and the unknown nature, the fact that you can't control it, there's so many unknowns, creates a very high level of anxiety and it's going on globally, right? So you could probably say, if we're in a college campus, like, oh, I know that my fellow students are going through finals anxiety. Like you kind of look at each other and you feel like you understand. And if you ever went through I haven't survived a war, but if you have been in certain warlike conditions, right, there's a bonding that goes on from people who had to survive that condition, which can bring you closer and provide resilience to one another. In this case, I think it's really unique because everyone's going through it, but very differently based on their prior upbringing, their personalities, everything that happened to them prior in their life gets kind of triggered. If you came from a secure and privileged situation, some people we've seen doing very creative things of going off the grid, getting out to nature, being able to take time at home with family and not commuting to work, creating more efficiency like this. I mean, I always joke I've done more podcasts myself since the pandemic started than, you know, in the 4 years prior. So on the other hand, for those who are without privilege and are struggling, this has meant we're all in the cave bunker together. And so, you know, whether you be someone who's kind of stuck in a house with 5 people and a lot of resources or means to go anywhere, and everyone's on Zoom school, or you're an ER doctor who's treating a bunch of COVID patients, or you're an athlete in a bubble, by the way, right? There has to be some way, like you said, to care for ourselves. And people say, but how? How, Richard, right? So this ability to create what they call in somatic experience work, the container or an EMDR, build space within your own nervous system. What does a boundary look like? Where can I feel good? Is it going for a walk? Is it going for, there's a park 20 minutes from me? Is it going petting my dog? Is it taking a bubble bath and telling everybody I'm off the grid for 30 minutes? You know, is it one night a week that I can order a pizza or some sushi in with a friend or something that creates a little bit of connection? For me, I found that there are still therapy groups. There are things still meeting via Zoom. There are some even meeting now outdoor spaces at an appropriate social distance. So it's highly dependent on what an individual is needing. But I think the fact that you're asking the question of yourself, what am I needing? And especially if you haven't been in that practice of caring for yourself, if you've always been about caring for others or worrying about others first, we do have to rein in sometimes this negotiation between, do I need more rest? We may need a lot more rest right now, a lot more you know, nurturing right now, and that's okay to be selfish in that way. You know, if people are feeling exhausted, it's because you went through 6 or 7 months of all your cortisol depletion. This high level of stress can't be maintained, and the concern is when you get to chronic problems, right? The Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychology has a definition when you're going through something for 6 months and then beyond. So we're in the beyond, and the concern is, right, that if we don't begin to operate a little bit differently within our own mental health, emotional health, treat it a little bit differently, that the body starts to have consequences, right? We're gonna have health consequences. Stress starts to cloudiness of the mind, confusion, you know, harder to focus, shorter temper with the people around us that initially maybe we're okay to be in our bunker or quarantine with. So I always ask that question, where is your boundary, right? Where can you find space, even if you're in a dense urban area? Can you take a walk? Can you get on some of these free apps now? Calm, Headspace, practice. Meditation is difficult, it's uncomfortable. You know, 1 minute, 3-minute exercises, and things that help you clear your mind and let go of some of the stress and bring back the breath. Almost every yoga practice, mindfulness practice is focused on bringing breath into the body and slowing down your nervous system that lets you know it's okay, right? Like everything you're holding on to, all that stress, all those thoughts about tomorrow or what's going to happen 6 months or a year from now, at some point we have to let them go, because holding them causes us to suffer. So that's kind of where my work with clients is figuring out where is that for you, where that may be for you, Dallin, where that might be for an ER doctor. Maybe they feel they can't really let it go because they're taking care of so many people, but there has to be 5-minute breaks. You're right. There has to be a transition at the end of the day. Otherwise, you know, we just risk becoming taken over by the stress and anxiety. We cease to impact and create change, and we just become affected by. And that's if you're not clear where that line is, that's when you should be, reaching out for help, or hopefully you have a few friends that are giving you signs or pointers that maybe it's time to take a break, take a couple days off from work, or take some space. If you, in any way you can create it in your relationship, and I know that's really challenging right now, and for each person to figure out what would that look like. Is it just going out for an hour drive? Can I get to a beach, someplace that reminds me of normal, healthy living?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think having those things that can kind of bring you back and rein you back in are super helpful. I really like the interview you did on your podcast with Paul, who was in the NBA and did all these different things, and now he writes and he speaks. And something that he talked about from your show was how he learned to write for an hour. And then once he hits that hour, he is done. He can listen to other music, he can do whatever. But during that hour, he's getting things done. And so he has it planned. And so it's very, you are very aware of yourself. And something I've been trying to do this semester is go for a walk like 10 or 15 minutes each day and bring a sticky notes if I feel the need. And then I just then I have something. I'm working on those things. They're not boggling up my mind, and something that really fast, I had some mental health struggles on my 2-year mission trip. I think it's just because the rigors of it, things I couldn't control, and just this feeling maybe of perfectionism that I was trying to combat. But I had a really good counselor, and so I'm very thankful for your help that you do for the world. So thank you for that. He told me that sometimes when we aren't careful, all of this stuff can be like we're ascending a mountain, and there's the point where we are just like, it just seems like too much, and it seems hard to go down. And so we lose track of our thoughts. What are some of those like warning signs or those different things that, you can kind of maybe nip at the bud and be able to avoid that from happening?
You're talking about warning signs when the anxiety has hit a level that's maybe at that kind of point of no return, where all of a sudden, I think that, first of all, paying attention to your body. It's not something, for all Western training, for my PhD, no, there was not a lot of conditioning about how do you slow down and go inside, right? We trust our thoughts a little bit too much. So if we notice your thoughts are racing, if you notice your chest is tightening, if you notice your breath is shortening, if you see perhaps, increased irritability, anger, withdrawal, especially from men, okay, if you feel overwhelmed, right? And so that may look very different for different people. Just constantly, just having trouble focusing, right? If at that level where even the smallest decisions feel like too much, or you're overwhelmed, and because there is so much pressure, right? If even going to the next grocery store or trying to figure out whether it's safe to go and get food because you're not sure people wear masks or not, or what to believe, or you're not sure what people's political beliefs are, and you're afraid of a conflict in a certain room or relationship, there's a lot to negotiate right now. So taking the time to go back into the body, and that's why having practices, which we call, grounding exercises where if you happen to be on top of that mountain and notice that overwhelm, I always ask people, right, and they say it in baseball a lot, be where your feet are, right? Start to pay attention. If we're so busy in our head and our thoughts, what's happening in other parts of your body? You may need, so that walk that you're taking, that you're describing, is not just to move, it's also to check in at where are we holding tension, right? Am I breathing right now? Can I take 3 to 5 breaths that are what we call diaphragmatic breaths? Can we breathe in for 2 and out for 4, right? As you're doing it right now for us, right? It's like, can I really exhaust and release the tension? Can I firmly plant my feet on the ground? Can I check in what we call a body scan with each part of the body? Oh, I'm holding tension in my neck. Can I just spend a few minutes trying to move it or release this or see what feels good? Do I need to give like a little gentle self massage? In EMDR, we have something called a butterfly hug, of kind of crossing your arms and right beneath your own shoulder plates, or acupressure massage, right? Like pressing right here in between the thumb and the pointer finger. So, we're just, no, and you can do that in your conversation. If I noticed that we were having a tense time right now and you were talking to me, and I may just need to notice that I got anxious, that something came up that was stressful and I need a little bit of soothing. So starting with the body and the breath is really important. Obviously, if we are lucky enough to have one friend, to have a support system, a couple people that right now that we can reach out to, not because of anything concrete, but just to be like, wow, I have no idea what just happened. I just crossed the street to the grocery store and somebody got out of their car and wanted to fight me. And I'm feeling completely triggered right now. I have no idea. That was so bizarre, right? I'm just trying to get out of this quarantine. I'm just trying to make it through a work day. And that did happen to me, by the way,
Oh, geez.
but yeah, but it's happening. People are going through a lot worse right now. And I think everything is more intense. I think, based on, right, economics, politics, like all the change that's happening, all the exciting change is also fraught with unpredictability and unknown. And I don't know that we're ever ready for that unknown, but it's hard to feel like we chose it when the whole avalanche started without our knowing. I think that's the real shift too. Can you find some friends to help you figure out, okay, like, can I game plan, right? If I'm at college and I got there and I don't even know what's happening next year, what can I do to focus on this year? What can make this experience, where I'm at my dorm and I can't even go on a college campus and I can't play my sport? What can I do to focus and make this a great year? What habits could I build? What are you seeing? If you're asking a friend, right? What are you seeing that I could work on to make me happier? What's something that I used to do that I'm not doing, right? So like you mentioned with writing, right? Oftentimes I myself and my clients make it such a big deal. Oh, I want to write, or I want to learn the guitar, but it seems so overwhelming. Well, just like, right, Paul shared on the podcast, well, it's 1 hour a day. Could you do 1 hour a day twice a week? And then share it with me, Dallin, as your friend. And we become accountability partners to each other. We can't go to the gym right now. Could we, take a socially distant walk together? Or could we just send each other, logs of what we want to do, 50 push-ups and 50 sit-ups 3 times a week? What's going to help us feel healthy and that somebody is supporting us? I think, like, what good is a goal if you can't share it with someone else who can say, also notice our achievements, help us get some of that dopamine and positive feeling, right? You might kind of want someone with you to be like, whoa, yeah, that trip down the mountain seems a little scary right now, but did you see how you made it up here? Did you see that time when we were did you know how steep that was? And I saw you just flying up the mountain. And you'd be like, what? We lack the self-awareness sometimes to see our gains and our growth and our progress. So I'm often gifted. I always joke that I'm thankful. I have one friend. He's not in the field of psychology or podcasting. He's in construction. And every time I call him, he kind of greets me with the same line, the same anchor. And he says something to me like, I'll say, I don't know, I'm not getting any listeners on my podcast, or I don't know, I'm not getting as many clients as I'd like, and people are struggling. He'll say, do you remember when we had breakfast? And you used to say to me, I have no idea how I'll complete my degree. And then when that happened, you'd say, I have no idea how I'm going to get my first client. So it's like, by slowing it down, and it's not an intentional therapy technique that I know of, but first of all, by drawing in that imagery, it's very powerful, seeing yourself where you've come from, and that you're an evolving human being, and validating each other for how much we've endured in the last 6 months. I mean, it's like a silent war. It really is. And everybody at every age level, I mean, especially for younger people, contending with your life being interrupted right now, the normal flow of socialization and play and all the things that help us feel good about being a human being have been interrupted. And we can't even hug it out. We can't even like do the normal things that help us get great positive chemicals going on in our bodies. So I think there's a certain amount of like, you know, you can commiserate a little bit in that, like, yeah, I see you fighting in this trench. I see the battle you're in, right? You may think you're just in Zoom school and, heating up some lunch in the kitchen, but it's not easy to be contending with all this information out there. So some of it may be filtering out a lot of that information, and going back in, slowing down what they say, and often Ken Revisa from baseball, control the controllables. That's how you work on anxiety. What are the things I can control? What are my thoughts? What are my attitudes? What are my beliefs? Am I willing to be supportable? Am I willing to allow help in to be a little bit healthier, in one small way, right? Maybe the major changes, they're not happening right now, but often life is changed by changing our habits, right? Am I willing to show up 5 minutes early for my client? Am I willing to prepare a little bit more next week? Am I willing to be better at my follow-up with my podcast guests, like we talked about offline? And can I give a little bit more gratitude for those relationships so I get more enjoyment out of them? So even if I have a few people in my life, I want to feel great and connected to those people and satisfied.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I think keeping in touch with people is absolutely crucial if you're going to want to keep growing and have that sense of normalcy, because a lot of those things have been, kind of just taken away from us. But for me, like, I have some amazing roommates right now. Like, one of them, he's like a budding chef and he's preparing to go on a mission, and he will make like these homemade Rice Krispie or homemade Reese's cups,
Oh,
and he's made like Oreo flavor, dark chocolate, white chocolate, milk chocolate. He's like, I just make them, you guys eat them, and they're just great. And it's like, I've had to be careful because I'll eat them.
yeah, that's been a mixed blessing of the whole thing. Yeah, we're cooking a lot more at home. We've had banana bread every week. Yeah, of course, right? Like there's a joke, that like everyone's going to come out of this like, several pounds heavier. And of course, after 6 months, I think people are realizing, oh, maybe I need to pull back on some of the indulgences. But people have made points to me recently. I had a guest on my show who deals with fitness and nutrition, and he said that I think it may be bears, if not, it's another animal that pretty much puts themselves in a type 1 diabetes every year.
Oh, to comatose and conk out.
That's right. So it's like the whole way we view health conditions. There's a certain amount of nurturing. There's a certain amount of getting in there. Now, of course, we can choose healthier things and we can learn moderation and other habits. But there's a certain amount of like, yeah, enjoying that, element, like, and appreciating the effort going into it and collaboration, which is beautiful and harmonious. Like that's what every team, every family, and the discovery of pleasure and joy through food, simple things, and someone's talents and gifts, recognizing that, like, who knows what you telling him you like a certain flavor does for his choices of what he produces when he goes on to run a restaurant someday. I mean, we have profound impact on each other's lives, even on a micro level. And I think that's, the empowering element of all this, that by being in our pod or being more connected and in tune with one another, and less distracted by being so busy, what the power of that is on a relationship. So I think it's beautiful that you appreciate your roommates. How do you keep from getting sick of one another?
Yeah, just I don't know. We you kind of choose your battles, and you get to know each other on a personal level. I feel like I'm pretty good at noticing little things that people enjoy, and so that's something I can always bring up. How's this going? How's this going? I know all the classes most of my roommates are taking, well, at least a couple of them. Just a general idea, and we always are up to pray or do scriptures together. Different things like that just helps us check in with one another. And those little things, like you said, they're micro, but they make a giant difference that we really can't see. Like, I look back at my life, and some things I don't realize how blessed I was to have that boss, that roommate, that person I talked to for that job. I didn't realize how blessed I was to have that until later. And so just I'm somebody I really, really try to appreciate those little joys with each day, because I'm only like the classes I'm in right now, I'll only take those classes once, hopefully. And but I can only take it in that circumstance. Like with those students who are at that point in their lives, some of them are preparing for graduation, some of them maybe aren't, and you get that unique time to help them out because they're going to change, you're going to change. And so it's important just to make the most of it. And I think the same thing goes with this pandemic. We don't really know what's going to happen with the next year, but we might as well just do what we can do, like you said, get creative and rejoice, make the most of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can acknowledge grief. We can acknowledge sadness. I'm glad you brought in, spiritual practice or scripture. This is a tremendous time, even though it's a micro habit of something you do every day, or maybe do only when you need comfort, depending on your level of adherence to faith or practice. But bringing in spirituality, I mean, we know the relationship between spirituality and mental health, and more even public government bodies here. Los Angeles County has finally started to roll out initiatives like that. Forever it was seen, at least when I was in graduate training, a lot of the research like in the early 90s was like a little bit, there was a separation between church and state. And we know that spiritual practice, the role of having a belief in something bigger, the ability to connect, feel like we're part of gratitude, health, healing, that there is a source of that wisdom or a place we can go to bring more of it in. That adds a lot to our sense of, overall well-being. And, the ability to come back from feelings of fear or illness or stress. So I'm hoping that, and now people that may not call it faith, they may not have been raised around spirituality, but finding some ways to slow down and separate from your device, from media. The importance to have that internal resource or a trusted, pod or friend group or something that brings you comfort and security. It's disconnected from a lot of that bombardment. It is so significant.
Yeah, that's awesome. We gotta talk, bring it back to, I think it was yesterday or the day before. I was walking back from one of my walks and I saw these two guys eating in a Five Guys, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go tell them about my podcast. So I went over, and turns out one of them actually wants to be a psychologist. So I was like, okay, well, what do you want to hear? I'm gonna be talking with a guy who, does a lot of psychology work. And he's like, well, I just want to learn a little bit more about the mental stresses between like different sports, because track, it's mostly up to you how you do, and it's a lot more individual of a sport, and it can be a little bit more mentally stressful, he was saying, as opposed to basketball where you kind of share the stress. And there's an individual piece as well, but mostly you're graded on team level more so. So do you have any like thoughts on that, or have you seen that with your clients, college students, athletes? I know college athletes would be, they live such a crazy life, man. Like going to
Yeah.
classes, and then it's like they're living two lives. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, at least in college, right, you're surrounded by a lot more structure than afterwards. But first of all, I think it's beautiful what you did, like the moment of seeing somebody, noticing people, being curious, engaging them, and then trying to explore that and tie that into your podcast is the essence of creativity and being in the space that you're in. And I love that becomes alive right now. And I'm a basketball guy. That's kind of what motivates me around sport. I love team dynamic. That's the way I process. I've learned that about my identity and being kind of a glue guy, and that's what motivates me to create teams and bringing that identity out into the work I do. So understanding yourself as an athlete can help you a lot in shifting forward how you want to transition afterward, or what other elements or skills you may really have that are maybe just unbeknownst to you because you've always been good at it. But particularly for athletes, and I also work with fighters and MMA fighters. So it's very different, the psychology and makeup and the battles I think that a fighter has to go through, maybe the basketball team, uh, you know, just by description of the sport and how they have to process a loss. But I do think even within team sports, right, that each individual is highly different and responds very different to coaches, tone, messaging, uh, perceived failure, right? We've had clients who, if they miss the first 2 or 3 shots, they're shut down. They're not going to come out and take a risk again. And if they, on the other hand, if they hit the first 3 shots, they're the best player on the court. We have other players that, right, will practice and fight, like the stories we've learned about, Michael Jordan in The Last Dance. So, and other people that when it's crunch time, the pressure's on, kind of shut down. So, you're asking, if you know what the differences are you asking how they cope differently? What would your 5 guys listener want to know?
I think he was just saying like the overall mental capacity, like how is that different? Because I mean, I did basketball. I have a basketball right there. I was trying to reach it, but it's too far away. And then I was the manager for a couple of years because I never made it in high school. And I remember like, those years of running track just so I could make the basketball team. And there was definitely a little bit more mental struggle for me with running track because I'm like running and it's like, your brain's like, oh, please stop. What are you doing? It's like, why are we doing this again? And then you have to like kind of switch it sometimes. Whereas with basketball, I don't know, I think you can kind of be a little bit more lax sometimes. You can like take a little slower on defense. But I think what you said is key because if you don't even know who you are and how you respond to stress, how you respond to these different things, or you're not willing to figure that out, you can really get in a messy spot. So I think it really just about that capacity and being able to control it and help it.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about mental skills, right, for individual athletes, I do think you probably have to become more aware of it quicker because, right, yeah, how is a runner do you do when somebody gets close to you, right? Certain runners get identified to move on to the hurdles, or the team. How do you do only responsible for a certain leg? But still, even tennis players, track, golf, they usually have a coach or a caddy. There is some relationship involved. How do you deal with a performance error? Do you treat a performance error on hole number 1 on day 1 of a tournament with the same way you would on day 5 on the final tournament? So can you stay in the moment? Can you evaluate your process objectively? What is your process for letting go of disappointment, right? We've seen, like, we know the performance curve when someone's stress raises too high and for too long, at a certain point it improves your performance. Be it a runner, a certain amount of anxiety, or as a swimmer, a certain amount gets you excited, gets you off the blocks, and gets you in the lead. Too much of it, right? Performance starts to slow down, coordination goes up, errors occur, and once we get past that cliff, there's usually kind of like the point of no return. So we see people who are 85% free throw shooters that all of a sudden tense up in different moments. So understanding mental skills training, understanding ways in which you can regulate your own nervous look, watch out for this, a couple simple, executable, positive self-talk, and like, you got to be willing to let go of the last inning, the last pitch. If you're a baseball player, you got to be willing to let go of it to be ready for the next moment. So if you're a tennis player and you can't let go that you had a bad point or a bad game or a bad set, or a bad match, then it's going to carry over. And so we see a lot of people, right, that when they're going is good, or how do you handle being on a losing team? How do you handle when, the environment is not? Can you still maintain that same positive work ethic and do so in a way even then to become a leader, to bring other people's up or impact them, and not just become part of the chaos and further break things down. So I think that could be really hard, right? If you're having a bad season, or particularly when people go through injuries, what that does to your identity. Am I the same? Can I, it's much harder to just do the things that were natural when playing your sport, like you said, was just fun, when it was just play. And like you mentioned, now if you're a Division I athlete and you're on a schedule of early morning study hall, late night study hall, 2 practices a day, travel, so your week is shortened. Finding the ways to enjoy it, and hopefully make some, Reese's with Dallin's roommate, finding ways to have some pleasure and joy becomes so essential, or motivation can dip. And when motivation dips, usually so follows your performance.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And you did all that. You said all that very clearly and effectively. So I hope that my friend gives the episode a listen so he can get all that sage wisdom for when he's in the same kind of a similar position that you are.
Oh, sure. And happy to share and connect with any of your listeners and friends and be a resource through Instagram at Richard Listens. And I am going to be releasing on behalf of, with Lorinda Phillips, who owns a company called Retired from Sports, a series of podcasts that'll be like a mini membership, very affordable, that will have all retired athletes. And some of them are at 24 years old, right, that are retiring. But how do you take this from beyond one level into the next? What do you do when your career ends? And so we have guests who are retired football players, tennis players, track, Olympic hopefuls. So I think it's pretty exciting to learn from people about that capacity, and just the fact that you begin to get curious about mental skills and your own mental process, that you're acknowledging that you're human, that we may have things that help us succeed at one level and another level may not be working, that need to be tweaked. We may need support in areas we weren't even aware when we weren't being challenged, or when our life's pressure was not to this degree. So I'm glad there's more material out there. I hope my podcast is a resource, and hope to support people in their nervous systems, whatever degree of challenge they're at, whether it be just considering whether you want to pursue psychology or how. One of life's great transitions is graduating from college. A lot of this pressure to figure out what's next. So the fact that you're making it a lot more curious, much more of an exploration, I think is great. And I think the fact that you host this podcast and provide that opportunity to share people's questions and interests is amazing.
Oh, thanks a bunch, Richard. Yeah, it's been quite a journey, and I enjoy being curious and learning about other people and their stories. So, real fast, could you share like a 1-minute version of why you do what you do, and then after that, jump into some ways the listeners can reach out to you and where we can find you?
Sure. 1 minute of why I do what I do. I've always been a listener. I've always been curious about the people from my kindergarten class. Sports gave me meaning, gave me purpose, gave me a little bit of confidence and identity. And hearing people, what they struggle with, has always brought out care within me. And it's also brought me closer to a lot of people. Some of my greatest friends struggled with different challenges growing up. And I think I also received that care from community and network, and was blessed to have that around me, to have people who took us into our homes and allowed us to play and grow up in safety. So creating that environment, creating that in a team environment or with a client, trying to bring any element of that forward or help them create more of that, inspires me and excites me. And to have a podcast where I get to share stories which reach so many more people than just that one client gives me that balance, that I don't have to feel like I'm just one thing. So I think allowing this ever expanding nature of roles, and to explore interests and realize I'm always a student, and I'm always someone who's also in the game with you. I'm always learning, developing, challenging myself. And I get a lot out of the relationships as well. It's very fulfilling to be in this position, in this career, and to be aligning it I worked for 5 years of in crisis and stress, and then to align it more with what my passion is and to find that out is a decision I'm so thankful for. I'm so thankful I had people in my corner willing to direct me and guide me, and I was willing to let it in. Like you mentioned, those messages can be there. We're not always willing to hear it. In terms of staying in touch with me, my podcast, Spotify, and all the usual channels, YouTube, Instagram, best way to get in touch with me at Richard Listens, and website richardlistens.com. So please subscribe, listen. We have a patreon.com/Richard Listens if you want advanced content. And if you need to call me, 424-209-7234. If you or someone you know needs help, I'm doing telehealth through the pandemic, and it's been a great way to help people or direct you best I can. So thank you, Dallin, for being present. And for professional reasons, LinkedIn as well, Richard Oelberger, PhD.
Yeah, that's how I met you, Richard, was through LinkedIn. I'm very glad we connected, and I look forward to staying in touch. So thank you so much for everything you shared. I'm glad you're following your passion, your dreams, you're doing what you're doing. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. And let me know if you market those Reese's.
Yeah, we've thought about that. I'll let you know.
You never know. Sure, Ben and Jerry's came from a similar place.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I'm grateful for it, and I look forward to getting the show and sharing it out with all our listeners.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Richard. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.